Thank you so much for attending today. The Cleveland Community Police Commission occurring at the Hough Library at on what's today's date?
This is Lexington. Oh, the date is the 23rd.
On August 23rd, 2023 will come to order at 6:01 p.m. I think that's Stephanie House. So we shortly will have the councilwoman of this ward. We would like to always give thanks for everyone that attends our meetings. We know this is a very important work, as well as each commissioner for your continued work and efforts in ensuring police accountability and constitutional reform. In a few brief minutes, we will have Councilwoman House to give a brief introduction.
Test, test. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everybody. It's good to see everybody. Welcome to the CPC. Welcome to Ward 7. Welcome to the Hough neighborhood. All of those things. I really just want to say hello to everybody. Really looking forward to the updates from the commission. I don't know if y'all, I should have brought my community agreements. Well, so for those who do not know, here in Ward 7, so one of the things that we usually do before we start a meeting is we come up with community agreements, right? And so for every community meeting, we read through those community agreements, and it's usually a call and response. And so I'm gonna just a couple of them off the top of my head. So since you all are in our house, I am going to introduce you to some of those things. So if you can all just indulge me and repeat after me. And those are how we engage in our dialogue here in Ward 7, okay? So the first one is to be respectful of others. There's usually, the one I do remember is there is a 3-minute time limit on conversations. Yes, and we have a honoring of our elders, honoring of our children, and be respectful of others' opinion. It's a couple of other here, but I'm giving y'all the general sense, the general vibe that we have in Ward 7. So if you all don't know, that's how we roll. And we just, hopefully everybody can have an enjoyable time here. But again, thank you all so much. We appreciate you all hosting and coming here, and we would love to receive you all again. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for attending. We're going to move to the next item of business, which is a roll call. Commissioner Adams?
Present.
Commissioner Benito?
Present.
Commissioner Shura?
Present.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Present.
Commissioner Early?
Present.
Commissioner Garrett Ferguson? Commissioner Kennedy? Commissioner Reeves?
Present.
Commissioner Ridgway?
Present.
Commissioner Van Leer?
Present.
Commissioner Wong?
Present.
Commissioner Zayed?
Present.
Commissioner Rodriguez, present. A quorum of commissioners needed to conduct business has been met. The next item is to review the agenda. Is there any items that need to be added at this time? Hence none, we're going to move the agenda to be read. The next item of business is basically an overview of meeting decorum, very similar to what our councilwoman has stated. So if you can please review the guidelines for public comment. This will help to ensure that our comment will encourage all voices, as well ensure that everyone is heard and that one person speaks at a time. Public comment will be at the beginning of our meeting, and if time is allotted, we can open up a second period. During any time of the meeting, if something shall arise, please feel free to speak to our CPC staff, which is in the corner right there. Or if you would like to email at a later date, clecpc@clevelandohio.gov. As well as we do follow Robert Rules of Order. So for just general, the commissioners, please ensure that you're speaking to the presiding officer or the chair at the moment, as well as ensuring that one commissioner is speaking at a time and that we allow one person to speak at a time. And if you would like to go again, please wait till every voice is heard from each commissioner, basically. Any further questions and concerns at this time? I do not believe we received any minutes. Okay. And we would like to just do a quick overview. Well, let's move into public comment first. Would anybody like to step to the mic? Any comments that would like to be displayed going twice? Okay. It seems like we can move to the next item. I hate to announce it, but I want to ensure I'm not taking away anybody's voice. Okay. So just a general overview that all the questions will be accepted from the commissioners during this presentation. And we have two guest presentations that will discuss basically the practices of police investigations. First, we will have Superintendent of Internal Affairs, Mr. Viland.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I want to thank all of you for inviting me. I always get reinvigorated when I get to speak to the public and to civilians about what it is that I do and what it is that my division does within the Cleveland Division of Police. So this is a great opportunity, and I thank you. Unfortunately, I was told that we don't have a clicker to fast forward our PowerPoint through, so I'm going to end up being kind of off-center, and I apologize if I don't get a chance to sweep the whole.
Would you like me to do it for you? I
No,
don't
that's
mind
okay.
getting
I don't
that.
mind, because I'll lose my train of thought if I have to keep pointing at somebody, so I appreciate that anyways, though, provided that this works. Yeah, that's not doing it. Yeah, so that's not even the PowerPoint. Oh, my. Well, if you don't mind. If you go ahead and scroll down to the first slide. First slide's easy for me. The first slide is just an introduction of who I am. Are you going to be able to get it? Yeah. So my name is Chris Viland. I am currently the Superintendent of Internal Affairs for the Cleveland Division of Police. Relatively new. I was appointed in the middle of last year to fill a vacancy that had been vacant for a period of time and filled with competent interim staff. However, the position is required to be a civilian position, and it took a while for the division to make a permanent appointment, so that's me. I came to law enforcement early in my life. I have 32 years of experience as a suburban police officer, and the last 10 years of which was as the chief of police of a local Cuyahoga County suburb. So the vast majority of my career was active law enforcement. I retired in 2019, was proud to have been appointed the first Inspector General for the Cleveland Division of Police, first civilian Inspector General. And I did that in 2019, 2020, 2021. Prior to that, I was also proud to have been appointed by then Governor Kasich as the director of the Cuyahoga County Mortgage Fraud Task Force. And subsequently, many years later, I was appointed by Governor DeWine as a member of the Ohio Organized Crime Investigations Commission. So I've had 2 gubernatorial appointments on my path to where I am today. And most recently, before I was appointed to this position, I served as the sheriff in Cuyahoga County. So 2021 and 2022, 2020, 21, and 22, I served as Cuyahoga County Sheriff. So that's me. If you go ahead and scroll up. My staff in Internal Affairs is just 7 investigators. I have 7 investigators with a supervisor and 1 administrative assistant. So you will see when my friend Administrator Perez gets an opportunity to show you his organizational chart. I'm very jealous at some of the things that he has that I don't have. But these are very good and competent investigators. One of the things that you'll notice is that all of the investigators have the rank of sergeant. And the reason for that is the way the policies are drafted in the division. A supervisory officer has to be the one who prefers formal disciplinary charges against a member. So it has to be a supervisor, and so therefore all of our investigators are sergeants. The way that Internal Affairs rests in the division's organizational chart is we are a direct offshoot of the Office of Chief of Police. My direct report is the chief himself. According to the settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, the head of the Internal Affairs unit has to be a qualified civilian. So I am not a sworn law enforcement officer with the division. I am a civilian staff member like any administrative staff would be. And I am not a former member of the Cleveland Division of Police Law Enforcement. So that's how I fill that role. And again, I report directly to the Chief of Police. The functions of Internal Affairs are fairly obvious, but I'll go over them really quickly. We conduct objective, comprehensive, timely investigations of what's termed serious officer misconduct that's either criminal or administrative. And we serve as also the home of the Force Investigation Team. And the Force Investigation Team is the group of unit members and division members that respond to all level 3 uses of force, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And any other assignments as directed by the Chief of Police. So we receive miscellaneous assignments at his request or at the Director of Public Safety's request. So I do want to tell you what Internal Affairs does not do, because oftentimes there is confusion there. So there's a couple of things here that we want to make sure everybody understands. The scheme of investigating officer misconduct, because it includes the officer professional standards, is that external complaints of misconduct are not generally investigated by Internal Affairs. They are generally routed through the officer professional standards, which is actually, in my opinion, a good thing. I think you get a more objective and better set of eyes on it at the front end. Where Internal Affairs would step in is for what we term serious officer misconduct or criminal behavior. There are other investigations that we may not handle within Internal Affairs because they are the type of investigations that have to be consistently handled throughout the bureaucracy of the city so that all city units and divisions handle things the same. For example, violence in the workplace complaints, sexual harassment complaints, EEOC violations, ADA violations. Those are things that the Division of Police itself can't do separately and silo itself, because if our conclusions are different than, say, the Division of Public Works or the Water Department, if we start having distinct differences with how those cases are handled, then we're showing disparate treatment throughout the city, and nobody wants to do that. So there's a lot of these types of investigations that will be handled by other agencies in the city, generally the Human Resources Department. That doesn't mean that we don't participate. It doesn't mean that we won't run a parallel investigation, but the primary investigation we will generally cede. Another source of complaints that we get is referrals from the Office of Professional Standards. So, as I said, Most external complaints, complaints that are generated by the civilians, the businesses, the people of the city that we serve, are going to funnel through the Office of Professional Standards. What happens, though, is that the investigators at the Office of Professional Standards are not law enforcement officers. They're not police. So they don't have any authority to investigate criminal offenses. Because of that, if they receive a complaint that looks like there's an aspect of that complaint that might be criminal for some reason, and the easiest one I can think of is if somebody comes in and complains that money was stolen out of my car during a tow, okay? Well, that's a theft offense. There's a crime involved. So then if OPS received that complaint, they would refer that to Internal Affairs so that we would do the criminal investigation. However, what happens in those cases is that once we finish the criminal investigation, whatever that is, whether we charge somebody or we find that there's not sufficient evidence to support a criminal charge, we then will refer that case back to OPS so that they could finish up with the administrative investigation and determine whether or not there's any policy violations or any administrative discipline that they think is appropriate. One of the things that I think is important that people understand, many people don't, is that when you work for a government agency and you are accused of misconduct of some kind, the employer has a right to demand that you answer questions that are narrowly tailored and specifically related to the conduct in question. So if we use the example of money being stolen out of a car, I can, as the employer, require that the officer involved come in and give me a statement and answer questions truthfully, specifically about his conduct with relation to that tow and what may or may not have occurred. I have the right to do that. And that employee, by virtue of the fact that we employ them, must answer truthfully. They must answer, and they must answer truthfully. Now, if you think about it, that's great from an employer standpoint. But from an employee standpoint, it may be a violation of that person's Fifth Amendment rights. Because under the Fifth Amendment, you are not required to be a witness against yourself. That's basic constitutional law. So what happens is there is a case, and I think the case will come up next, Garrity versus New Jersey, where the trade-off has been that if we as an employer are going to force an employee to answer those narrowly tailored, specifically related questions, that whatever those answers are and whatever comes out of that interview cannot be used against the employee criminally. So we think that's fair. That's been case law for decades now. But what that does is, especially with a limited, as I said, I have 7 investigators, what that does is it really limits how we investigate cases, because the person who's investigating administratively, who would have access to the information on a compelled interview, cannot share any of that information, and that information cannot be known by the person who's investigating the criminal aspects. Because if that information gets transferred to criminal, that criminal case is now tainted, and we're either going to lose a criminal case or there will be a problem in discovery when that happens later on. So what happens is with internal affairs investigations, what we do is we bifurcate the investigations. It's very important that we separate and segregate the criminal aspects of the investigation from the administrative aspects. And we can do that a number of different ways. You can do that in time. So what we could do is we could do a criminal investigation first, not worry about any of the administrative compelled interviews, come to a conclusion, and then proceed with an administrative investigation after that. There's no chance of information tainting anything at that point. But what that does, unfortunately, is that extends the time of an investigation. Or what we can do, depending on the case, is that we can do them in parallel and make sure that within the office we have bifurcated the case so that the criminal investigator and the administrative investigator have no knowledge of what's going on between them. That helps us with more serious cases where we have to come to a quick resolution, but it makes the actual process of getting the investigation done internally very much more difficult, to make sure that nobody has a conversation next to the water cooler or something like that. It's just a little bit more difficult. But bifurcation of investigations is very, very important. It's something that many people don't know about with internal affairs investigations. Virtually every investigation we do is mixed administrative, and criminal. The criminal investigation in some cases is simply a question of whether or not an officer is derelict in his duty. There is a criminal statute in the state of Ohio, dereliction of duty, and oftentimes if we're looking at administrative misconduct, we also want to make sure that that's not a dereliction of duty. It is also not a criminal possible charge. So the vast majority of our cases, 99% if not more, are mixed, administrative and criminal. One of the other things that we don't do, just so everybody understands, is we don't investigate members who are no longer with the division. But that's not to say we don't investigate them. It just means that we only have limited amounts of things that we can do. So once you leave the service, I can't compel you anymore to come in and answer questions under Garrity because you no longer work for me. What I can do is I can continue the criminal investigation. If there's a reason to charge a person criminally, we will follow through all the way to the end with a criminal review. With regards to an administrative investigation, that person is no longer an employee, so you can no longer discipline them either. But what we do is we complete the investigations, we come to a finding, we make sure that all that stuff is documented in the personnel files so that A, if somebody does a public record request, that information is always available, and B, if that person should ever seek reemployment, that information is also available to the city. As I said, one of the other functions of internal affairs right now is that we house the force investigation team. Force investigation team is actually the, I guess, the home of the FIT, but it comprises members of the homicide unit, the crime scene unit, records unit, OPS has representatives, and the training academy unit all have participation in investigating higher level uses of force. And when we talk about higher level uses of force, they're very specifically defined in policy. Number one, and the most important one, is any use of deadly force, regardless of whether or not there is a death. So if an officer shoots his firearm as a use of force and doesn't hit anything, that is still a deadly force use of force investigation. That is still something that the force investigation team comes out to investigate. Anytime that there's serious physical harm that results in or is likely to result in death or hospital admission, we come out to those. Death of any person in custody. So recently, end of last year, we had a situation where it appears that a subject ingested a lot of illegal substances on his way to jail to try to not get caught. And when he got to the booking area, he passed out, overdosed, and unfortunately is deceased. That was a death of a person that was in our custody at the time. So that was a case where the force investigation team came out to do a full investigation, even though there was no force used per se. It's just another one of our responsibilities. Anytime there's a loss of consciousness, anytime there's a neck hold, anytime there's a strike to the head with a hard object, and we have chosen to define that voluntarily as a closed fist being a hard object. So anytime there's a strike to the head with a hard object, any criminal misconduct at all involved in the use of force, multiple applications of the taser, and interestingly, a lot of lower level uses of force on a handcuffed subject. And the reasoning behind that is it's presumed that once you are in handcuffs, you are in a much less able place to protect yourself from injury or fall or any of those things. You have now become much more vulnerable. So once a person is handcuffed, an even lower level of force that happens will be investigated by the force investigation team. We also respond to critical firearms discharges that don't have anything to do with use of force on a person, so we will do accidental discharges of firearms. We will do the discharge of a firearm at an animal that's not just for euthanasia purposes. We also do uses of deadly force by outside agencies. So if a neighboring agency chases a subject into the city of Cleveland and there's a confrontation and there is a use of deadly force, then that's something that the Cleveland Force Investigation Team would go out to investigate. Recently we had a situation where there's an allegation that an outside agency chased somebody into the city and intentionally struck them with a motor vehicle to try to get them to stop from fleeing. Well, striking somebody with a motor vehicle is a use of deadly force, and so the Force Investigation Team is in the process of investigating that. And again, fit investigations are also required to be bifurcated, just like a regular IA investigation. But again, something that many people don't consider, but I always like to bring to people's attention is when we're investigating a use of force, we are looking at best 4 separate investigations, if not 5. And what I mean by that is there is the initial investigation of the subject's behavior as to whether or not they committed a crime that stimulated the incident itself. There is the inquiry into administratively whether or not that use of force was within policy or not. There is the administrative investigation of each of the involved members that were involved to determine whether or not they followed policy and were compliant. And then there is a criminal review, always, of whether the officer involved did or did not violate the law in his use of force. That's usual, and what I always like to add, because it's not specifically written, but it is one of the mandates of the force investigation team, is that we're also doing an internal administrative review of the criminal investigation itself. So when we bifurcate, the half that's doing the criminal investigation, especially of the officer, we monitor that and we watch their interviews and we watch their evidence collection and we determine whether or not that's a fair, biased, and impartial investigation. So for every use of force investigation, really there's 5 sub-investigations that go into that. We've got it down, I think, relatively well to a good pattern in practice. We do best practices all the time, but always we like to remind people that you don't get instantaneous results. Things take time to do well, and that's one of the things that we do with Force Investigation Team. With regards to deadly force investigations, currently we operate under a memorandum of understanding with the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department. So if we have a use of deadly force where a person is deceased, the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department comes in and takes over the criminal half of the investigation. They bring their own evidence processing people in. Right now, that's the State Bureau of Criminal Investigation. County sheriff's investigators and the county prosecutor do the entire criminal investigation. The force investigation team does a parallel administrative investigation as to policy violations, et cetera, while at the same time we monitor the sheriff to make sure that they're following all best practices in what they're doing. So you know, the disciplinary scheme that's been developed for the division is roundabout. When I talk to people in my personal life and I try to explain it to them, I say, have you ever heard stories about people saying how the IRS code is so huge and so crazy you wouldn't even know if you were violating it half the time? This is the scheme that the division has developed over the last 5 years to do discipline. This isn't even the best one. This is one that was created in 2019 by Captain Simon at the behest of the members of the settlement agreement parties, and it's relatively accurate. I can make it available through your executive director if you need it. There's a lot of exceptions to it, which is why I don't necessarily pass it out. But I do want you to get a sense of, depending on where the complaint comes from, depending on where the complaint is forwarded to, depending on whether it's administrative or criminal or both, the path that that complaint has to get through before it gets to active discipline sometimes is very confusing. And it's almost as if we have to pull out the textbook every time a case comes in and just check the check marks and make sure we're doing it down the right path. I don't have anything further. I will make myself available for questions. I know that I may be eating into Administrator Perez's time. What I will do is, if you guys don't mind, I'll answer anything that you want. Or if you prefer, I'll let Administrator Perez go and I will hang around and we could both answer questions about discipline when he's done. So I will leave that to your discretion. But I'll be here as well. So.
All right. Hey, so good evening. So I'm Administrator Perez. It's a pleasure actually being here. I know that there has been, I think I've been on ground for only 90 days. So I'm coming up on my 4th month. And I know you guys have been on ground a lot longer. And so what's, 90 days to me probably seems like an eternity to you guys, not having me up here. You guys are actually my first public speaking engagement. So thank you for allowing me to be able to break this out and be able to do this. And thank you for everyone who's actually who's shown up today. I want to speak to you guys about the Office of Professional Standards. And before we get into it, we're going to focus on the Office of Professional Standards and the processes and the structure. And we're really going to talk about getting back into taking care of people. That's really what this is all about, and that's what this agency is actually built on, is taking care of people. And I think at some point in time, the administrators and the senior investigators and the investigators before I ever came here tried doing the best that they could with what they had. As you know, with the charter, things evolved each year. So I can't tell you what 2014 or 2015 looked like, or 2016, and it is not for me to ever pass blame to somebody else. I can just tell you where we're at today and where we're going to go from today moving forward. But I want you guys all to know I will always give them credit because what's standing there today is what they actually built. And so I really do appreciate all that work, even though I haven't met most of them that were there. Next slide, please, Chris. So this is the agenda. We're going to go through some introductions because I want you guys to actually know like who I am, where I come from, what shaped me. Can you go to the next one for me, Chris, please? Next. So this is me, and I'm 45. So this is my 45-year life, right? Up on a PowerPoint. And this is my family. So I come from a very blended, multicultural family. My father was Hispanic, first generation out of Puerto Rico. I moved to Chicago with my uncle and my Aunt Gladys. And that's where they found my mom, out of Ohio. And that's where everything kind of started. From there, I moved to Ohio. When I played at the university, that was the only way I could actually go to college, was being able to earn a scholarship, because that was probably not in the family cards at the time. And then from there, I joined the military. And what I will tell you is that throughout my whole life, it's all about communities. Whether I've been deployed, whether I've been in combat, whether I've been on peacetime, whether I've just been back here in the States, whether Korea, Germany, Saudi Arabia, it's all about the communities. There's so many things that you can learn from them, and no matter how bad the times are, there's a love, appreciation, and like an empathy you have when you're all going through kind of the same thing. And it takes a lot to be able to build that resiliency and build that understanding. And so when I retired from the military with 22 years, it was important to come back here because there's a lot that I have that I feel can shape and influence where Cleveland's trying to go. And that's going to be seen in the direction that we're going to go with OPS. So next slide, please. So this is the police oversight structure. As you can see, there's a lot of entities that are out there that have oversight. But I'm just going to focus on the piece that's circled because that's what I'm here for. There's a lot of talented professionals that are the leads of those other agencies and organizations, and I do not want to take away from their ability to be able to come here and present in front of you and the community and explain, the greatness and the things that they're doing within those agencies. And I wouldn't do them the honor, right, speaking on their agencies. So I'm going to let them do that, but I'm just going to speak on the Office of Professional Standards. Okay. So next slide, please. These are the references. When I got here 90 days before I even came, I did a lot of reading because I really wanted to understand the foundation of where we were at and where we actually needed to go. And nothing was, if I've learned anything from the military, is when I came in as a lieutenant, I was hot, aggressive, like I wanted to get after things. And I didn't care how, I just wanted outcomes and achievements. And then as I matured, evolved, and the Army put in a bunch of leadership developments and a bunch of barriers and things in front of me that I had to overcome, I started to realize that I want to be the turtle. I don't want to be the rabbit, right? I want to take it slow. I want to build things that last, and I want to make sure that we're investing in people. Yeah, because the moment that the community doesn't feel like they're invested in, the moment your investigators don't feel like they're being invested in, people kind of just turn the switch and they kind of walk away. And then it's a lot harder to get them to where you want them, or get them to where they're living their best life, or they're at that full potential. So I'm going to tell you that we're going to take it slow at OPS. We've got some things that we're looking at. We've got some things that we're going to move forward with. But we want to make sure that it's developed, we want to make sure that it's grounded, and we want to make sure that it's transparent to the community, and the community is allowed to give us feedback. And you'll see that in some of the products that we've come up with, and just the last 60 days out of the 90, to where we're really looking for the public to be engaged. This is your agency. We're a premier investigative agency, but we're only premier if you feel that way. I can say that all day, but if you don't believe it, if the citizens don't believe it, if the people who come here to visit Cleveland don't believe it, then it doesn't exist, right? It's not believable. So these are the sections and the parts that we're really looking at. Human error, right? So Section 102 is not ethics requirement, right? That's Section 103 of our OPS manual. So human error happens all the time. You look at slides all day, you have things. But the avoid the conflict and the no conflict. I think everybody is aware, and if you're not aware, my sister is a detective with the Cleveland Department of Police. She works in the domestic violence. So Chris came up and he talked to you guys about the criminal aspect. So if a complaint was to come in for my sister, right, we can't determine if it's administrative or criminal because that's not our place. So we will automatically move that over to IA so that they can do that. And during that time that they're looking at it to see if there is something there that is criminal in nature, we will then work with the city just like you do when you feel like the interest of the parties aren't in the interest of the board. We will look at the city to try to find an investigating agency to be able to look at that administrative side. So we will work that so that when all of that is happening, we will have another plan in effect to look at the administrative side once IA gets done, if they feel there's no criminal activities. So I want to share that with you because at no point in time do I want to put any of my staff or any of my investigators in a position to ever make them wonder or even question how I might feel about their decisions. That's not for us to ever do. So we have other agencies, other opportunities, and that's the way that will work out unless something changes. But I want you guys to rest assured, like if those things were to happen, people would be notified that that's occurring, and then that's happening, so that there's transparency. People trust transparency. People don't trust secrets. Next one, please. So what's our mission? Our true mission is that we investigate every single complaint that comes to us. Well, we have to. And we give it the care, the quality, and the assurance that it's deserved. And at the same time, we're going to start communicating with the complainants. We're going to start communicating with the officers. And we're going to start doing it in a way that gives multiple touch points so that people have an opportunity to come back and provide additional documentation, or at least talk to us about what they're feeling or what they're thinking. The types of complaints that we look at is lack of service, improper procedures, unprofessional behavior, harassment, biased policing, missing damaged property, excessive force. Chris talked about the damage or the missing property. Somebody's vehicle's towed, the money stolen, and then they say that they believe the officer stole the money. So that's criminal in nature. We pass it off to Chris. If there's anything that's still there that we feel might be admin, we still track it. Once Chris is done and the IA teams do what they do with it, they refer it back to us. And then we take a look at it and we make sure that we're in agreement with what was founded, right? But we still do our own piece of this investigation. At no point in time do we leave it to any other agency to come back to us and tell us how to do our jobs. We're independent and we will remain as such. The types of dismissals are non-CDP employees. If it's not like a Cleveland Department of Police employee, or if it's not an officer, we don't have jurisdiction or authority. But what we can do is provide a little bit of assistance to that individual to find out who or what agency that person belonged to, Metro Police or something of that nature, and then get them in contact. Like, here's a number, you can contact them. If you were able to watch, or you had the opportunity to see our CPRB meeting on Tuesday, one of our last slides was a slide that just had the Highway Patrol's information and the Sheriff County's information, in case anyone had a complaint that they wanted to make from those people, because we're trying to create those partnerships here in Cleveland, and as people are trying to create partnerships and bring in more types of policing into the city, we have to take more care to ensure that our citizens and those that are visiting aren't being abused and aren't going through something and not knowing where to go for that information. So we're trying to communicate that information out. Our three big functions is investigations, assistance, and teach and train, right? So everybody understands the investigation part. It's a non-criminal administrative. When we look at the assistance part, it's really trying to assist people, whether it's a public records request, a person might have their vehicle towed, and now we're going to assist them with how they recover their vehicle from that impound lot. It might be an individual has their property taken over and logged into the property book, but they're supposed to have it back. We're going to assist them and help them with going through the right procedures to get that money back. And we've done it in the last 90 days. It's important that even if it doesn't result in a case, that there's resolution. And that people feel like they had somewhere that they went to and that they might want to go to again in the event that they need something, instead of just staying at home or complaining about a system that they believe is broken when that system just needs to be known. So next slide, please. So this is our task org. Chris said he was jealous of it. Don't be jealous of it. What's not in color is unavailables, right? So individuals that might be on leave, or individuals that have other things that have taken them out of the office, personal, medical, you name it, aren't up there. We have 2 investigators that just came in, so they're in processing. So they're trying to learn the system. They're still trying to get access to their computer, to the, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do with them. We created an onboarding schedule that's 3 weeks long. So those individuals just won't be available to actually do investigations until probably September 1st. Abby O'Neill's our general manager. She just came in. She's a native of Cleveland. Came out of, she went to California for a different job and then wanted to come back because this is a place she wanted to finish up her career. And we actually were able to snag her up, which was great. So we have the permanent structure that we need. The Human Resource Department in the city has been great at assisting us with fields. When I got here, I heard all kinds of horror stories. You can't hire anybody. You can't bring anybody in. And what people fail to understand is me as the administrator, I don't hire anyone. That's the CPRB. So the CPRB nominates, they approve, and they're the ones that hire the investigators and the staff. The only thing that we do is we go through NeoGov, we go through the systems and the platforms, and we do all the vetting, some of the interviews, they do some, and then we package that stuff up, we present it to them, and they're the ones that actually make those selections. But the city has been really great. 90 days, we've already hired 3 people. We have 1 more coming in. We should have had a total of 7, but as you guys know, the process, some people don't want to wait a month to work, and it's understandable. And so some people dropped off after accepting. So we had an individual that it was our senior who dropped off. He took another job, and then we lost 3 investigators who just took other jobs in the process. Next one, please. OPS touch points. So a lot of time, since I've been here, people will keep asking about this OPS manual. Where's the new OPS manual? You guys don't have a manual. We have a manual. And there's a lot of good stuff in that manual that outline what the OPS touch points is that is probably completely foreign and unknown to most people that have filed a complaint. And this structure was pulled out and created just reading the old manual. And this is the touch point that puts our investigators back in touch with our communities and our citizens. So a complaint is received. Once that complaint's received, it goes through our intake, it comes to me. Once it gets to me, I have 1 to 3 days. I do a preliminary analysis and investigation, and I do a memo off of it that kind of gives a plan of action to the investigators. But I make contact, I verify all the name, the address, telephone numbers, emails, and then myself and the complainant, we have a conversation, and they help me to understand what the situation was. Sometimes people say it's a lack of service, or they'll say someone was unprofessional, but then after hearing them talk and get it all out, it's not that they were unprofessional, it's that a report wasn't filed. So it's actually a lack of service. But it's having that time to talk, let them talk and allow them to have their piece and to say everything, and then to sit there and take all their copious notes for them and then spit it back to them and allow them to come up with the decisions on how we go forward. Because they're all very bright people that call, for the most part, right? I mean, and they understand once we have that dialogue, they understand what they want and how they want to go forward on things. So once that's done, I send that over to my senior, which is Vince Fanari. Vince assigns it over to one of the investigators. The investigators have 5 days. 5 days to call that individual and let them know that they are the investigator. This is your OPS number. This is what their caseload looks like in case the investigator has a large caseload, because they need to start developing expectations on when they're going to be able to get to that investigation for that individual. I always tell them when I do that initial call, I give them my phone number, I give them my email, and I give them my direct line to my office. And I let them know that in 5 working days, if an investigator has not identified themselves as being their person, they are to call me, and then I'm to re-engage the investigator to ensure that by the end of that day, an investigator is contacting that individual. Since we have implemented this, I have not had any phone calls saying that, hey, an investigator hasn't reached out to me. Our investigators are doing what they're supposed to because it's structured and it's a process and they understand it. From that point, we identify a standard or complex. If it's a standard case, we're looking at 45 days to try to complete it. We have a backlog. Everyone knows we have a backlog. Once we get up fully staffed and we have 10 investigators, we don't need 10, but as long as we have the preponderance of investigators fully active, we'll be able to take our backlogs and start looking at them. One of the things that we're doing with case management, while we're looking at this with the senior, is identifying those cases in their priority of cases, right? So are they a standard, are they a complex? Once a case, at any point in time during a standard case, it can move to complex. We can start to identify that there's more things that we need to take into consideration. We will extend it, but at the 45 and 75 day mark, we're calling the complainant back and we're letting them know, you're standard, this is where we're at. You're a complex, this is where we're currently at. But we're building the expectation just to let them know where we're at. As Chris alluded to, if an officer leaves and we're in the process of an investigation, but they leave the CDP, then that investigation stops. However, we track the trends. So at the end for the annual report, we will tell you how many officers left the CDP where either their investigation was complete or it wasn't complete. And so we'll still track all of that, and we'll give you like the number so you can see how many officers we've lost over that year. And then what was that timeline that that investigation was in. From there, once the case is complete, it goes to, we'll get into that process on the next one. But once those cases are complete, the investigators call the complainant and they brief the complainant out on a baseball card. We call it a summary card. That summary card lets them know the evidence, the findings, the who, what, where, when, and why. Lets them know basically what the investigator saw and what they collected during that investigation. It doesn't tell them is it sustained, is it unfounded, was it insufficient. We don't go into that. But anyone who can read that can kind of tell which way that investigation is going. We, as investigators, only provide recommendations to our board. Our board members are the ones that make the determination at the end. So we don't ever want to tell a citizen, this is what the recommendation is going to be. So we leave that until we actually do the CPRB board, the hearing to the members. If at that point in time the citizen says, hey, I've got supporting documents, I want you to go talk to this witness, I want you to do this, then we extend it for 5 days and we follow up with everything that they gave us. If they say that they have nothing, then we call the officer and we let the officer know, and we give them the same brief. There have been cases since I've been there where cases have been in the unit for 2 or 3 years without being heard. They've been completed, but it's been 2 or 3 years and the board hasn't seen them, or 1 or 2 years and the board hasn't heard them. And so that's a lot. That's a lot of time to be under where you feel you're under investigation. So we want to do right by both sets to make sure that everybody has that fair understanding that we're impartial. We're there, and we're going to do the best thing we can for everyone, but we have a job, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to it through and through. Next slide. So this is just a 7-step investigation process, which is what we kind of alluded to and talked about. And what I did was I put the consent decree in the paragraphs with the sections that kind of help if anyone ever wanted to go back and look at that to see how this was generated and where this is mandated for this stuff. But as you know, like we put it into our system. Step 2, that's me. That's all the stuff that I will look at and that I will complete before I give it to the senior investigator. Once it goes over into that fact-finding process, that's everything that investigator is going to do. He's already got the investigation plan that has been provided to him off of a memo from me, or the senior, and that's everything that they start writing out in their investigation plan. Who's the witnesses, who's the subjects, what kind of evidence are they going to start requesting, and they start to build that timeline so that everything starts to come into picture. Once that is completed, they do a one-on-one with the senior. The senior goes through it, kind of looks everything over. If the senior says we're good, go forward, then that'll come up to me. I'll take a look at it, At that point in time, then we do those touch points again with the complainants and the officers. Then from there, it goes into case prep, and then it's ready for the CPRB hearing. One of the things that we're doing with that outbrief to the citizen is trying to identify to them, do you want to speak at the board? And if they do, that's a priority now. So that means that that case is going to move to the next CPRB hearing. And we're going to prioritize it that way because we want them to get there. And we want them to have their say. Not everybody wants that, but the ones that do want it, we have to be able to provide them that type of service. So we're trying to ensure that once we start doing these things, that it all leads into the resolution of the complainant and the police officer, understanding what the outcome may be, and having their ability to speak about it. Next slide, please. So this is the summary investigation outbrief, and this was posted. This was one of the investigations on Tuesday. I just took some of the information off, but we post all of this stuff with the agenda that I provided you guys with as well. And we use this during case management. So it's a number of how many reviews we have. One of the other things that we do once we do this brief to the complainant and then we do the brief to the officer is if the investigator has identified where a policy or training, there's a recommendation for it, we will draft up that recommendation and that policy prior to us ever sitting with a CPRB hearing and then telling them we have a policy recommendation. We will do all of the homework up front, and then we will let the citizen know, like, this case, this is what we found, but we're also going to do a policy recommendation. And then we're going to hang it on our portal for 15 days for the community to provide feedback so that they can read it, provide feedback to it, and let us know, like, yes, no, or maybe I want to see this, or maybe I want to see that, if that happens. And we'll take all that feedback into consideration so that it's out there and it can be seen. The other thing that we're looking at with that is that once that's completed, then all of that gets packaged, given to the CPRB members for their pre-briefs when they start doing all their homework and everything before the hearing. And that way they can see that stuff, and if they have questions or they have feedback or they want to see other things in that recommendation, they can. So those are the things that we're trying to make sure that all of our deliverables are in sync with all of our touch points. Next slide. So 90 days, like I said, I've been here 90 days going into the 120. As the administrator's initiatives, I will tell you that we've lost touch with the community. I have a community engagement officer, but we've lost touch. For when I got there, it was our investigators weren't going out. They weren't trying to get with the complainants and doing face-to-face interviews. They weren't trying to get into the community. And I understand COVID was a thing, a real thing, and had a lot of effects on a lot of people's lives. And that, it maybe prevented some people from wanting to do that. But that prevention then became a catalyst for I don't want to do it. And that's not how you provide customer service. The way we provide customer service is by knowing people, by understanding who they are, by having an individual call us and knowing their first name and being able to say, I don't need your OPS number. Mr. Douglas, I know who you are. I'm very familiar with your case. That's when people start to understand and have buy-in into what we do. And the same thing with police officers. We owe everyone a better service at the end of the day. It's what you guys brought us here to do. It's why you built OPS. When I'm looking at my assessment of OPS, we definitely have a lot of shortfalls. When you talk about training and development, it has been absent. And it was absent because the caseloads were so large and there wasn't a huge staff. And so instead of, what do they call it, robbing Peter to pay Paul, instead of doing all of that, people made hard decisions. And they said, we're going to do this instead. And we're identifying that, but now we got to get back to what's right. We got to get back to the basics. And we got to make sure that what we're keeping in those chairs and what we're providing the citizen is a professional investigator and a professional staff with the qualifications and the certifications that lend that confidence, that trust, and the legitimacy that OPS is an actual agency that is there, right, to protect them and their rights. And so that's what we're really going to try to get back to. We have some reorganizing, we have some restructuring, we have a lot of training that we have to get done. And this is, I'm just speaking OPS. We just have a lot of training to get done, and we have a lot of relationships we have to rebuild. We're missing our partnerships, we're missing our relationships, and I understand the frustration and the anger that people might have with certain entities and certain agencies, but please don't ever confuse passion and purpose with just being mean. right? Like passion and purpose, that's love and like empathy. Passion and purpose isn't rude and soulless and where you rip in dignity. Like people watch us, people look at us, you know, and throughout my life I've had great role models. I've had really bad role models. I've had great mentors, great coaches, great communities, bad communities, and I've even had great friends, and I've had friends that I had to say, like, you're good for a season, but that's about it. Like, can't keep this up. This isn't where I want to go with life. So OPS is going to get back there. Like, we're going to build those partnerships. We're going to get back to where the community knows who we are, and they want to come to where we're at, and they want us to come to where they're at. Is that going to happen by the end of this year? It's not. But I will tell you that by 2024, this time next year, if I'm standing up here and I'm still giving you the same speech, then I will happily drop the mic and give this up to somebody else. Because my purpose is for the communities to thrive, for my investigators to flourish, and for my staff to flourish. That's the only reason that I'm here. So, you know, once again, I appreciate all of you guys allowing me to come out here and speak to you. I appreciate you guys taking the time for this brief. And if at any point in time, I always tell people my door is always open. You can call. I'd rather have a coffee and a conversation, but I will meet with anyone at any point in time, and everything that you have to say or want to say is relevant to me. It's extremely relevant to me, and I don't care how long it takes. I want to get to it, all right? And I know our agency does too. All right, thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, we're going to open questions to commissioners. Commissioner Scherer?
Yeah, Mr. Perez, do you guys have vehicles assigned to OPS?
We do, sir. We have 4 vehicles that are assigned to us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Villan, did I pronounce that right?
Violent.
Violent. What about inspections? Is there still an inspection unit?
Inspections is still an active unit in the Bureau of Compliance. And
Now, are you splitting, when you have a criminal investigation and the administrative is the inspections more or less doing the administrative to keep it totally separate?
Inspections is a totally separate unit, and they don't have any connections with internal affairs investigations.
So your investigators are all in one office?
Yes.
And each one is doing administrative and one is doing the criminal? Is that what I'm
So
understanding?
what we have done with most cases, because I know where you're going with the question, is we're segregating the investigations by time. So what we're doing is we're
I
ensuring
understand.
that
I
the
got you.
criminal is done first so that there's no tainting of the follow-up administrative. There are cases where we do them parallel, and in those cases, we actually segregate the documents and we ensure that the people who are involved don't have access one side of the room to the other side.
Gotcha. Also, if you have a use of deadly force out there, who makes the call whether they're going to be interviewed under Garrity or under their rights as a civilian?
Both. So both happen. So
Is it-
the
we used to have the-
the bifurcated investigation, the criminal half will do a separate interview under Fifth Amendment, so an officer does not have to implicate themselves. It's a voluntary Fifth Amendment interview. But at the same time, the non-criminal investigators, and in the use of deadly force, the criminal investigators is the homicide unit. Different floor, different investigators, different everybody. The administrative is done by internal affairs.
You guys oversee, they always did the heavy lifting, homicide unit.
Well,
Internal affairs would monitor and make sure that the investigation was done correctly and everything was followed correctly.
yes, except for the fact that all of the disciplinary specifications come through us,
Right.
even something that comes out of
It's always
homicide.
been that way. And you report directly to the chief?
Yes, sir.
And who makes the call whether it's going to be, prosecuted or not? Is a prosecutor come in at any time? When, in the old days, we had a prosecutor respond right to the scene of a shooting, and they would make the call whether the officer would be interviewed under Miranda or Garrity. I'm just wondering who makes the call?
So
with-
right
with the-
now, in a use of deadly force situation, the county prosecutor is immediately involved by phone, so it's actually Prosecutor O'Malley. And for the most part, they are assigning special prosecutors, making motions right away in court to have a prosecutor that's not housed in Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office be the prosecutor. And since generally those people come from Columbus or from BCI, Attorney General's office, they're not an immediate scene response, but they are part of it
Okay.
from the initial.
Any other questions? Commissioner Garrett Ferguson?
So I guess this question would be more for OPS. So after, on that previous slide, after the case is closed and it goes to CPRB, do you all make the recommendations with the disciplinary action? You make those recommendations and send them over? Or do they then meet, once the case is closed, go through all of the findings like is in this, and then they pull up the disciplinary matrix and they figure it out? How does that process work?
So that's part of the CPRB's mandate, is to use the groups and the violations, right? The disciplinary matrix is what they use. So when we get done, we do the whole summary with the complainants and everything, and then once we've got everything finalized and complete, then we go ahead and we put our recommendations on those cards that we send with the rest of the investigative package, right? So those summary cards are used in a multitude of different ways, but it's really to help shape and focus our CPRB members on the information to look at. But they look at everything, right? And so at the very end, they might depart from something that we say as a recommendation. We don't have any control of that. That board will meet in live forum. They'll have discussions like they have, and sometimes they'll come up with something different. I know in one of our meetings, I think on the 8th of August, it was an unfounded on one specification, but then they brought another specification, and it was the same as an individual felt that that the police were unprofessional, but then the board found them to have not provided a lack of service. And one of the things that we're trying to do is ensure that the citizens are in agreement with what the specifications are. Because there's been times in our meetings where the citizens will stand and say that's not the allegation, or that's not true, what the investigator wrote wasn't correct. By having that final piece, that final touch point with them, it's to validate. This is what we're looking at. These are the allegations we came up with. Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns? Do you not agree with this? Let's have that conversation. Let's have that talk. And then that helps us to provide a more well thought out, more well investigated package to the board to make those decisions.
So do you all use the disciplinary matrix and the groupings when you do the recommendations too?
We do not. So we
Okay.
do the recommendation as sufficient, right, insufficient, founded, sustained, unfounded, those four.
So as far as the allegations, are
Yep.
they sufficient? But you don't make recommendations for disciplinary?
No, ma'am,
Oh,
we
gotcha.
do not.
Okay.
We'll make recommendations when it comes to training policies, any equipment policies, like anything that comes up as a policy, an institutional, right, look, we can make those recommendations. And that's why I said, before we provide those cases to the board members, we're going to do all that homework and make sure that what we're providing is relevant. Because in some of the cases with the backlog, we're stating that there's a policy recommendation, but that case was like 2 years ago. So is that policy still relevant today? And by not doing the work up front, I can't answer that. Right.
So in that type of scenario, are you guys then, I guess, contacting the police department directly regarding the policy to check and see if that policy is still relevant? Or do you ever work, I guess, even with the police department with policy recommendations?
We have to, right? Because all their policies are live documents, so they're always changing, always revising. So we have to make sure that what we are speaking about or what we are making recommendations on that's what's today's document. Because if it's not, and that sometimes the CDP's already made the change, now we have a board that's making a recommendation to something that's already occurred, and it kind of like peels away at our legitimacy a little bit, because some people do see it.
Commissioner Benito?
Thank you so much, Mr. Violent and Mr. Perez, for being here and for your fantastic presentations. I have a couple questions. The first, I was wondering, Mr. Violent, if you could talk us through the process through which officer-involved domestic violence cases are investigated, from kind of the moment where, like, police might show up at
Yeah.
an officer's house.
So we have to split this into two use cases. The first use case would be a member officer who is alleged to have been involved in domestic violence within the territorial limits of the city of Cleveland. And then since the residency requirements don't exist anymore, we also have to look at if a member officer is alleged to be involved in a domestic violence outside the limits of the city of Cleveland. And the reason that is for the most part, domestic violence is a misdemeanor crime, and officers, City of Cleveland sworn officers don't have misdemeanor powers outside of the city. So outside of the city is the easiest to explain. If a domestic violence incident occurs outside the city, the law enforcement agency that has primary jurisdiction does the criminal investigation. That officer is required to notify his supervisory staff up through to IA that he is under investigation. And then we take over the administrative portion of that investigation and we monitor the criminal case to the end to make sure that that's done. That doesn't mean necessarily that we rely on the outside agency. It's not rare that we have a case where a suburbs prosecutor doesn't want to prosecute a law enforcement officer. So a criminal charge may not come out of that. But in internal affairs, we will press an administrative disciplinary specification for a violation of the rule that says you can't violate the laws. So just in the last 6 months, we've had 2 cases where outside the city a domestic violence incident occurred where the outside city agency chose not to do anything, and yet we moved forward with domestic violence-based discipline in those cases. Now, inside the city, it's a little bit different. If an officer is alleged to be involved in a domestic violence incident inside the city and that's found out on the scene, those responding officers have a supervisor come immediately and internal affairs is notified. And as soon as we respond to that scene, internal affairs becomes the primary criminal investigator for that. Then what we'll do is we will follow through with the criminal investigation and we won't do a compelled administrative interview until the criminal is mostly done. So that's how we do our bifurcation in that. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Oh,
So, Commissioner Benito, did you have one more? And then we go, Commissioner Adams, Commissioner Reeves.
I think Dr. Adams has a follow-up to that, so I'll let Dr. Adams go and then I'll ask my second question.
Wanted just to ask generally, is that a general, like the way that you deal with officer misconduct within city Cleveland limits and then outside of city Cleveland city limits, is that just a general policy? So if it wasn't a domestic violence case, say if it was maybe drunk driving or it was they got into a fight in a bar but they were in a suburb and they weren't in Cleveland, does that policy is the same?
It's not a policy, it's the law.
Or the law.
Yeah, so what it is that law enforcement officers, sworn law enforcement officers of the city of Cleveland do not have misdemeanor arrest powers outside the boundaries of the city of Cleveland. So not only for domestic violence, but unfortunately for OVI, which happens for assault outside of the city, for disorderly conduct outside of the city, most of those misdemeanor type things, which unfortunately do occur, we have to rely on that local home jurisdiction's criminal prosecution, but we handle the administrative specifications. And as I said, we have transitioned over time to, while we have to allow that process to work itself out, if they decide to do nothing, that doesn't handcuff us. We still will proceed with formal disciplinary charges, even if they choose not to prosecute, because that's just the right thing to do. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then my question for both of you is, what would you like to see us work on? And, are there things that you see from your work that you, would like to see us be able to collaborate, or that you see as some of the biggest needs that you'd like to see us focus on?
So, partnerships like crutch, but OPS acknowledges your guys' roles, responsibilities, and authorities. And nothing's more beneficial to an agency to be able to have somebody come in and be able to provide that outside look when it comes to evaluations, when it comes to inspections, when it comes to audits, just when it comes to being able to take a better look at ourselves. There are things that, like even with a PowerPoint, you can stare at that all day and you think you've fixed everything, but then once you put it up on screen, a lot of people tell you the stuff that's not fixed, right? And that's the beauty of having outside oversight. That's the beauty of being able to have entities that can come in and be able to provide that to you. And I think as long as we have that understanding of what those roles and responsibilities are, that will help us to take a better look at ourselves and to be able to be more proactive in the way that we do things, the way we communicate, the way we conduct investigations, the way we track. It's extremely important. And I think that there's a unity of effort that has to be created. And that unity of effort just comes from all of these oversight structures actually identifying the objectives that they want to complete at the end of the year, and we're all working towards that. Because at the end of the day, the deliverable are the end users, is our families and our communities. So it's a win-win as long as everybody's like going in that direction.
I guess I would just add that I think the one thing that I would ask of all of you, and it's difficult, is just patience. I think Administrator Perez and myself both want to be active change agents. We have taken these positions because we want things to get better, and we have plans where we have laid out a roadmap to make conditions improve and to garner that transparency and trust for both of our agencies. And there's nothing more disheartening than to have a group of well-meaning people say, we have an idea, just do this, and have it be told, we're not ready for that right now. And that's what's going to happen. And you have to understand that working in a bureaucracy with various different types of oversight that may conflict, getting change done is a process that takes time. I'll just give you a quick example. When I first came on as Inspector General, one of the biggest complaints I heard from supervisors on the road was that it was very difficult to maintain a notary public status because there was a requirement that many police documents had to be notarized. And reimbursement from the city took too long, and the training was ridiculous, and they were losing notaries by a ton, and nobody could get any work done with notaries. And I heard this story, and I was aware that there was no requirement that those people be notaries. The state law required that there was a certain amount of training and that any police supervisor with that small amount of training could serve the function of a notary solely for police documents. Many of the suburbs had changed to that a decade before. So I went with my great idea that I was going to solve all of these problems for the city. I'm new on the job, and I say, this is an easy one. I had the whole plan laid out. I had made that significant change in multiple different agencies. And from the day I brought it to the attention of the police administration to the day that that was changed was about 14 months. So I've been in your chairs. I also like to be a change agent. I just ask that you understand the network of things that are involved in change, especially in police oversight. And if you feel at any point in time that you're being ignored, that's more a process thing than a philosophy thing. Director Goodrick and myself have had many conversations where his presentation is what a great resource you could be. And I agree 1,000%, and we don't ever want to lose that. So just when you can, remember those things and be patient. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Reeves, I'm sorry, I forgot who was next. I'm trying to, oh, you don't have anything? Did I skip Commissioner Adams? Or, okay, Commissioner Wong, I'm sorry.
Hi, Mr. Violin and Mr. Perez. I just have a series of questions from, according to the 12th Annual Monitors Report. Mr. Violin, if I could start with you. There seemed, and I know both of you are new to the job, so in Mr. Violin, your kind of compliance paragraphs are 177 through 192. There seems to be quite, there seems to be quite a bit of non-compliance and partial compliance and operational compliance. Is there any update since March 2023 that you would like to comment on from the monitor's report?
So what I will say is this. The compliance process tends to be relatively reflective because it requires an auditing portion of the process. And when people who are in charge of compliance audit you, they are necessarily looking at what has happened in the past. So what I can tell you is that, yes, there are compliance issues with partial and operational compliance in the semi-annual report. However, many of the things that are being reported are not the way that we currently do business. It's just that the monitoring team, with the resources that they have not had an opportunity to come back through and do additional auditing on current practices. So we have made, especially when it comes to force investigations and some other things, we have made significant changes in daily operations, culturally within the unit and procedurally with how we do things. They just have not gotten to the point where they have been formally audited for compliance at this time.
So, since you mentioned the force, review board and the force investigations, I believe you were the a police inspector general at that point, and there was an issue of a police officer shooting another police officer. And in that report, you made a number of recommendations and
Yes.
suggestions.
Yes.
Have those been?
Every one of those has been
have
implemented.
been adopted?
Yes,
Great.
ma'am.
With regards to staffing, it says that you had a decrease in your department from 9 to 7. So that's unfortunate, but your caseloads have increased from 126 to 166. Given
Yes,
this.
ma'am, and we're on track in 2023 to
To
be
even be more.
at 187 at this
So
rate.
is that arising in any way from the policy that was put down by Calvin Williams and Chief Drummond, preventing officers from reporting other officers to OPS and CPRB? Have you seen?
I am unaware that there's a policy that prevents.
Yeah.
I think that it's an OPS jurisdictional issue that OPS is not to investigate a complaint of one officer to another officer, against another officer. But I would defer to Administrator Perez about that. I don't believe that's a police policy.
I think it was a GPO that was put down, so.
Okay. But I think the genesis of the GPO is, I think there's an external foundation for that GPO.
So what I'm asking is that I'm assuming there must be some misconduct that other officers see from other officers.
Yeah, so
is that what you're seeing? Is there an increase because of the
No.
officers reporting each other?
No, I think that what's happened is that when I walked in the door, things that may not have risen to what was perceived to be requiring a formal documentation or investigation, I think I'm a little bit more tight with my interpretation of those things. So when things come to me, it is probably more common that I'm assigning those as actual investigations, and that may not have occurred a couple of years ago based upon people's interpretations.
Okay,
I think that has more to do with me, but.
Okay, great. One last question.
Sure.
You mentioned in your presentation that certain violations are sent to HR. In the monitor's report, they had been tracking 2 internal cases alleging harassment and bias, and this was referred to HR Department of the city in 2021. As of the publication of this document for March 2023, they've not received any other updates.
Right. So I don't know if you had the opportunity to view or be part of the semi-annual report presentation in front of Judge Oliver, but at that point, I made the presentation directly to the court that we agreed with the monitor that tracking of HR investigations was a failure point for the city, not necessarily for the division, because the HR doesn't necessarily answer to the division, but it was important enough to us that in those cases now, we maintain parallel case tracking with an IA case so that they don't get lost, so that they are followed through, and so that what the HR results are, we can stimulate earlier finalization, and then we can incorporate their findings into our casework.
Okay, great. And it says, sorry, one last question. It says in the consent decree, the IA investigation should be completed within 30 days. Is that correct?
No, it's 60 days unless
60?
there's an extension for things that are outside the control of the division.
Has that been generally, I know that you're understaffed. Have you been
So
able to?
that is a conversation that we're currently going through with the monitoring team with regards to interpretation of allowable reasons for extension.
Okay.
There is one specific extension mentioned in the settlement agreement, but it says it's an open-ended clause, and we've interpreted some other things to fit in that clause which would allow extensions. And so right now, we believe that if we take those extensions into account, we are more compliant than what is being monitored at this point in time.
Okay, Thank you. And Mr. Perez, if I can ask you a few questions?
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. So from the same document, the 12th Monitor Report, what struck me, I understand you're also new to your
Yeah.
position, but there seems to be some continual issues with community-facing, communicating to the community, what OPS does, and those, could you comment on what efforts you have made in those regards?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are working with the monitoring team. That was something that came up I want to say the first week. There was a lot of things that came up the first week in May. So OPS has came up with a strategic community awareness plan. It's a slide. I believe it's in your OneDrive. I believe I shared it with all of you, so you should have it, Co-Chair Ridgway. But if you don't, please let me know, and I can just send it to you. But and currently, right now, we are still working on our community engagement plan and awareness. We're hoping to have that over to the monitoring team through Dr. Anderson in the month of September. But there's a lot of research when we're talking about communities. There was some very vital or critical gaps, right? There wasn't any community engagement going on. I mean, let's just be honest, and full transparency. Because they were so short-staffed, the community engagement officer wasn't out there. When I came on board and I asked for an events calendar, or when we requested stakeholder names and contact numbers, those things didn't currently exist. And so we have to reestablish those relationships. And that was like one of the biggest things that kind of informed us about what our priorities needed to be. To be this agency and to have the roles and responsibilities and the authorities that we have, and then to not have the voice of the community or to not have the trust of the community, that speaks a lot. And we're going to work through that. And it's not going to, like I said, we're a turtle. We're not a rabbit. We're not trying to run to the end of the. There's a lot of communities that are out there. There's a lot of wards, a lot of districts, but there's a lot of communities, and there's a lot of people that are informal leaders for their community and formal leaders. And it's our job to find out all of them and to be able to have that relationship, because that's a lot of information and a lot of insight coming back to us to help us to be able to devise those plans. Now, what I will say is the hiring of the general manager, Abby O'Neill, she has 25 years of HR with at least 12 years of community experience. And that was one of the biggest selling points. She understands grants, she understands contracts, she understands how to get out there and do the engagement piece. And so she's going to be at the tip of the spear on this, because we identified that there was a shortage and we were missing it. OPS now has its 3 permanents, right? And myself, the general manager, just came on board, and it looks like Vince Fernari is doing an amazing job for us right now. And that is crucial. Within OPS, the permanent structure didn't exist. And when you have leadership that isn't permanent, or you feel may not be permanent, it's hard to give it everything you got. So we are addressing it.
Thank you. I had a question about the procedure manual. That is what, I know you cannot speak for CPRB, but when Mr. Michael Hess came in, it had been 2 years and that manual had not been updated. My concern is I have in front of me I think a findings letter dated from the CPRB from April 12th, 2023, and it gives the information of the CPRB finding was unfounded, but there is a sentence that says the findings of the CPRB are final. And that's concerning to me for obvious reasons because of Charter 115.5. While we are, not necessarily as a board necessarily going to take every single appeal, I just think from a community-facing point of view, this fact, this sentence is not necessarily true. There are other avenues of appeal for the community. Would you mind telling me if you know anything about why this sentence is being included, and what you think should be done about it?
I mean, I think you know better about what needs to be done about it from a CPC standpoint. That letter was in April. I came in May, and as I said, like 90 days in, we're still trying to figure out a lot of things. I really can't comment on that. I think if we can get the principals into a room, which is that unity of effort, bringing everybody together and having that dialogue, I think having the right principals in the room for that conversation is the best way to go. Having me say what I believe my opinion should be, that's not appropriate. And I think the citizens and everyone deserves better. And I don't have a good answer. And without having a good answer, I don't want to really throw something out there that's incorrect.
But if like you talk to these people that you take in the cases first, are you going to be able to convey to them that there are other avenues beyond the CPRB's findings? I mean, is that something that people ask for? Like, what happens if the CPRB find something? Maybe it's, that there is some discipline, but it was not satisfying to the complainant. Have you faced questions like this? And I'm just saying that we all are participating in this educating and bringing awareness to the community. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Especially,
No, I concur with you, ma'am. I think you're spot on. The challenge is it has to be communicated by all levels. And right now, there is no communication. And the citizens aren't asking about that right now, which doesn't mean that that's right. It just means that there's an information gap, right? We've got to feed that information. We've got to build that transparency. But I can't answer that because there's a lot of entities that go into that answer. And I think, once again, the right principles, the right people that are in there that can get that done. And I think that's where we need to go with this.
okay. Sorry, one last question for both of you. Since many of us are on committees that will require records in your proximity or possession, what would be the best? We have a policy that any commissioner can ask for records while CCing the executive director. I would like to hear for your process, what is the ideal situation for you for us to request records from both of your departments?
So, I mean, I've got a chair, Billy Sharp. That's the best I can give you right now. I mean, that's who I report to.
Okay, so you are suggesting that if we need any OPS or CPRB records, that we go directly to Billy Sharp?
I'm not suggesting that. You asked me where I would get my directives from. I'm just telling you where my directive would come from. That's all.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, records, packages. I mean, I still answer to a board that has to, like, there are some policies and procedures that just have to be outlined. I am not opposed to not being able to do the job that is required. But as was stated, policies, procedures, like, I just don't, I don't do my own thing. No, a lot of us don't.
We understand. We just know that according to the consent decree, that we do not have to go through a public records request for these records. Right.
Okay.
So, and Mr.
So
Vyland,
Commissioner Wong?
if Mr. Vyland can answer that part of the question, thank you.
Okay.
Sure, and unfortunately, our process right now is that during the pendency of an investigation, those are not public records and we won't release them. Once an investigation is concluded, however, it's our preference that they go through the public records process, and the reason that is that there are significant amounts of information in those files that are not public that have to be redacted by the law department. And because the public record process already contemplates doing that, they have people who already will redact video, will redact portions of electronic files. Rather than create a separate process, it's our current request that those records be processed through the public records pipeline so that those redactions can happen quickly for you.
But if in our investigations, we will have access to, we're not just, limited to public information. If we need confidential information, then we run into.
So there are different levels of confidential information. There is a type of confidential information that you will never be accessible, and that's state computer leads OLEG records. And those are NIA case files. So, yes, you are correct. You are authorized to access more records than a civilian would be, but that's not what's being redacted out of the files. What would be redacted out of the files would be things that you don't have leads or OLEG certification and access for.
Yeah, I'm just concerned because the charter directly says not to go through the public records process.
And I would have to defer to your legal counsel and the city's legal counsel to make those determinations. Those are not within my purview.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. We're looking to continue to fine-tune these processes. We continue to work in partnership to ensure. Thank you so much. Commissioner Gary Ferguson.
Yes, I just have two more like scenario-based questions, and I don't know who can answer, so whichever one. So the first one would be, in incidents where there's like an officer misconduct, where the officer is Cleveland police officer, but maybe they're serving as an off-duty officer, and they might work at another department or work for another auxiliary department that may have an MOU with the city, or they may just work for like a nightclub or something. There's a complaint because a civilian notices that they are a CPD officer. Which one of your officers would investigate that? That's my first question.
Yeah, so you saw the maze I put up of, okay, so often the answer to that question depends on who's making the complaint and to whom the complaint is made. So what I
Okay.
say is if somebody calls OPS, OPS is going to take that complaint and start working on it. If somebody calls IA, we're going to take that complaint and start working on it. Secondary employment is something that we have control over, an officer's off-duty conduct. So we will absolutely investigate both criminally and administratively in a case where an officer is off-duty on secondary employment. That would be us, and it would probably be supplemented by Administrator Perez, but I'll let him.
Yeah, just like what Chris stated, it just depends on who they call. So
Okay.
we've had several cases where during secondary employment, something has happened, and the officer has to give up their name and badge number. And then if they submit that complaint through us, then we start. And then if it's criminal in nature, we refer. And if it's not, we just continue moving through it.
Does the the agency that they work for secondary employment, if it's like a actual another police department, like a CSU or something like that, like
Like
with-
Security Alliance or something?
No, like the other, like auxiliary, I guess, like a UC or a CP, like
I'm not
CSU, like would
familiar,
those
and
contact
there are,
you?
okay. I was going to say, generally, that's not an issue, but I'm being advised that we have some officers who do carry multiple certificates. Regardless, that would still be us.
Okay, and I didn't know if was there anything that said that those other places
would be
have
both.
to? Both, that's what I was, okay. And then my next question was, there's oftentimes a lot of complaints that's made in regards to officer interactions with youth. And I know sometimes it can fall under bias policing, sometimes it can fall under use of force. When those incidents are happening, where there's complaints that are youth-specific, how are they handled? Is there like a certain amount of discretion that is taken amongst privacy with parenting? I just kind of want to understand that process when it's a youth complaint.
So if it's a juvenile and a complaint comes in, usually the complaint doesn't come in from the juvenile, it comes in from the parent, right? And so as a parent being the complainant, we investigate. And then it's the nature, right? So was it unprofessional, harassing? Do they feel like they were targeting that individual? And those are things that we will investigate and go through. And then we do that case like all the rest of them. We take the GPOs and the manuals from CDP, and we look at what they've established. So if it's a juvenile taking with an interview, typically there's a supervisor that's going to be there with them, and they always inform the parents. And when you read through it, you can see where if the parents give permission, or even when officers have made appointments with parents to bring their children in, things of that nature. Like you just have to look at the totality. Each one's so different, and it's just making sure that we're looking at it from the scope of the complaint.
But it mostly goes to OPS, right?
Well, it just depends on who they call, and so that's the thing, right? With us, with both of us being here, there's so many oversight agencies for policing. Like you guys are in it, so people may come to you, and then you may refer them to us. So it's just trying to figure out how do we get them, where do we get them. But for the most part, we're both there. We don't get a lot of walk-ins. But the officers give them complaint sheets, believe it or not. The officers take them with them on their rides, and when a person's like, I want to file a complaint, we've had several officers that have helped the individual fill out the complaint, put the incident on there. And we can see that because it says filled out by officer, badge number. So we look at those things. The district's always forwarding to us. They have about 24 hours. There's never really been a delay with it. People are very responsive when a complaint is filed. I don't think, from our point of view, we get them, right? So for me to be like, maybe we don't get them all, I don't know. I just know what we get.
And I would just follow up by saying, for the most part, complaints from outside of the division tend to funnel through OPS because that's the channel people are familiar with. Okay? That doesn't mean that we won't take them. Just statistically, they probably get more. And then IA tends to get internally generated misconduct, where a supervisor finds an issue, or there's a policy-driven reason why we are looking at things like, for example, uses of force. We're not looking at uses of force on a case-by-case basis. We're looking at them it's driven by policy. But that being said, it's not unusual for us to have a use of force case involving a juvenile where we find out perhaps that the use of force wasn't reported properly. Well, that wouldn't be something that OPS handles. That would be something that we would handle as internal discipline, and we would push that up through the disciplinary process.
So I'm going to take Commissioner Early because he hasn't speaking yet, and then we can have Commissioner Benito.
Just a quick question. I'm on the city website, and I noticed it changed today. So are you all?
Yeah, I'm aware.
Okay.
I'm so aware.
So just so we're clear, the city website changed today. So will you all have your own standing alone website where you can have this educational information listed?
We are trying to get to that.
Okay.
So it took us by surprise too, because as you can see, our leadership's gone, our whole page is gone. You have to actually go into public safety, CDP, 4 or 5 clicks, then it's all the way down. And then when
Could you please step to the mic?
Oh, yeah, sorry. And then when you start to look at it, everybody's grouped. And then it's just a paragraph. Some of our stuff's hung there. So yes, we definitely took a look at that. We saw it today. We always click on there to see where we're at, and we knew that they were changing or they were migrating to a new one. So we're working, we brought it up, and we're in conversations with Dr. Anderson just to try to figure out like what's the best way to go. You know, CPC has a great website, so we are looking at like what are our options, what are the things that we need to do, is it something that we need to put into our budget, like what's that cost analysis look like? But we are very aware, and I do apologize for that. Yeah.
Commissioner Benito.
And I apologize if you've already, I think you might have said something about this, but I didn't quite catch all of it. So I just wanted to double check. But I think you both talked about this kind of need for us to figure out how to collaborate, how all of our processes will work together. And I know one thing that we've been hearing is about the development of the CPRB OPS manual. I think you said a little bit of something about that. And one thing that we've been hearing is that, you know, we're having to wait for that in order to figure out how these processes will work together. And so I was just wondering if you could, one of the last times that, you know, we heard about that at one of our meetings was when the CPRB chair came. I forget what's his name? Thank you, Mr. Hess. And so that was a while ago, but we haven't, at least I haven't heard of any updates. And so I was wondering if you could just kind of explain when we might have access to that, when then we can really sit down and figure out what, you know, our collaboration on these processes will look like.
And so, I mean, sadly, I don't have access to it. What I have access to is the current one. That's I don't want to use the word outdated because we were so out of compliance that using it now is really helping us, right? It's bringing back those touch points. It's bringing back a lot of things that were already in there, that were outlined, that were structured. So that has really been where our focus has been. I can't tell you when the new one will come about. I think, once again, that's one for the principals. And
so you haven't been made aware of any updates on that?
So I'm going to say the same thing that people probably told you. I know that it's in the works, but
No.
I haven't validated or confirmed.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll have our final comment from Co-Chair Ridgway.
Personally thank each of you for coming. I thought it was a great idea when it was suggested that you come and present together, because there's so much that may begin in one area that may migrate over to another one, and I felt that it was super important that we understand this whole information flow from one, you know, agency or department to another. I've just been very fortunate to have been sitting in your meetings, Administrator Perez. I have attended every meeting since April. I was even online yesterday with your meeting, and I have learned so much from being there. And I have seen parents come in with their youth, you know, to speak. I have seen instances where people who had filed complaints did not agree, you know, with an investigator's report. And that investigator, you know, stepped back and they did some additional work and brought it back. So I really appreciate that flexibility that exists. And I think one of the most important things you have said is about patience, because you both are fairly new, to your position, but so are we. And I think that we need to be able to understand the processes and rules that other organizations or agencies have to see how we can work to best get that information. And I particularly want to thank you, Administrator Perez, because you did open your door, and my co-chair and I, we went in and spent a couple of hours with you a couple of weeks ago to try to come up with a process for getting the cases that have been closed. And it was very encouraging to see that you could put a package in front of us that had everything in it. The investigators report, the cameras, whatever. But we did talk about the need that will probably exist to redact some of that information before it can go public. So I understand what you're saying too. And I think that it is important that we understand the processes, the procedures, the rules of everybody that we work with within the city, and especially with those organizations that exist as independent, agencies as well, because that's where we are. Even after we sat with you for about 2 hours and came up with a process that we thought would work and that we could get those cases fast, then we got a whole ruling from the shared attorney that actually spelled out exactly how it should be done, which was counter to what we had come up with. So I do think that there is a need for more clarification. There is a need for further collaboration, to make sure that the information that we need in our committees to do their work, that we can get it as expediently as possible. But I think that we made a good attempt to get started with that, and I want to say thank you to each of you. I guess I have one question, and I want to just make 3 other comments. One, when you said that your decision is final, that's not saying it cannot go to us or to somewhere else. It means that the decision that has been made by the Police Review Board is final. Yet, there have been instances where those decisions were sent forward and they may have been rejected by the public safety. It may have been rejected by the Chief Drummond. And so then the question becomes, are we in a position, or are you in a position to appeal those cases once those cases have been rejected by public safety or by Chief Drummond?
So, if you, I'm sure you guys are all well versed with the consent decree. It states in there that there is a responsibility for the board to inform any complainant about the review process. But once again, that process needs to come to fruition.
Yes.
And I think once that does happen, then we are then at a position to where some of our documents can then be revised to reflect such guidance. But until then, it's just not appropriate for me to make that decision without there being that,
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's all.
And so I know that you have sort of laid out a rough plan for attacking these backlog cases, that you have, and sort of a schedule about how many cases you need to review in order to, to diminish that backlog in some way. And that's encouraging to hear. And I know that you have decided to go to 2 meetings a month. We have had the in-person meeting, and you just had your second meeting yesterday that was online. It was a virtual meeting. So I wanted you to speak to that, and in the meantime also to just share briefly what your meeting schedule will look like, especially with adding that second virtual meeting. And before I stop, I want to recognize that you do have an investigator in the office. So could you stand? We need to see your face. This is one of the investigators with OPS. I've had an opportunity to listen to your reports, and I just think that the work that you all put into this, the detail of your reports, I think all of that make for a very good investigation. It makes for good cases that will eventually come, that may eventually come to this group. And we can see all of this data in one place and know that it has been a thorough investigation that you have done. So I want to say thank you. Would you give us your name? I should know, but I don't do names very well. That's right. That's why I couldn't pronounce it. So there you are. So thank you. We appreciate your coming out tonight as well, because we have seen your, I have seen your work and know that you're very good at what you do. So thank you. So could you just end by sharing with us your meeting dates and just sort of a rough idea about how you plan to work through the backlog of cases that you have?
So there's two backlogs, so I want to make sure we identify both of those. We have the CPRB backlog, which they have done a phenomenal job coming off of. I think after the meeting we have in September on that second Tuesday, they should be down to just about 30 cases. And that's where we're looking at prioritizing to make sure that, we're able to give a complainant a window to say, yes, you're going to be able to speak. And getting them up there, and then also helping them. You've been there. Sometimes people just need a little bit of shaping, and that's what our investigators can do on that teach and train. Is, hey, this is what you want to say. This is what you're thinking about. Let's talk it out. Let's rehearse. Let's just get you out in front. We only have 3 minutes, and that's very short. When it comes to the schedule, it's in the agenda and it's posted, and so the chair, Mr. Sharp, has decided that September will be our last two. And then going into the winter, we'll go into October, November, December, January, and February, doing ones. And then coming out of that, we'll look to see where we're at, and then start up twos again, if that's the case. But we are looking at doing it the same way, of being able to at least have 5 months where we're doing double sessions. But once again, it looks at, what's that backlog. When it comes to the cases, we're currently, I believe, we're at 160, no, we're at 210 cases that are backlogged, is what we're currently looking at. We received, I think, about 100, we received 212 just this year, and we've already completed 32 of them and had them to the board, and the board's already seen them. We have 20 cases left from 2022, and that will take away 22, 21, everything will be done, and then we'll be current from that point forward. Once we get our staff and all of our investigators, which this is a shameless plug, but in 1 week, 2 of our investigator positions will go live in NeoGov. So in your communities, if you have people that have investigative experience, I would ask that you please get them on the city web portal, look at those job applications and go that route. I also have a budget analyst position that's open. They have to take the civil service test. But that is also another thing that we're looking at that will come up in 2 weeks as well. We'll send out the link once those things go live to whatever partnerships we currently have. And we're just asking that you reach out to your communities and see what people have interest. We've also looking at doing an initiative to where when you look at OPS, it's very top heavy. Being in the Army, we have soldiers that are brilliant, that can do jobs that officers are doing, that can do jobs that senior NCOs are doing. There's nothing that prevents somebody from fulfilling their potential when you give them the training and education. I think in Cleveland, there's a lot of brilliant people out there that just need a chance. So we're looking at where we can build a lower tier to where we can try to bring those people in. It's kind of like an inspector general. You don't really necessarily need a degree, but you need the training, you need the certifications. You need to be able to prove that you can overcome the barriers in order to be called an investigator. And so we're looking at how can we create initiatives, how can we create internships, how can we create just community L&Os that live and work in our office to help us reconnect. And so once all of those things are part of the community engagement plans, when all of those things start to get fleshed out, we'll start pushing those things out to everyone in hopes that you guys can be that reach for us in order to make that connection.
Thank you. We really do appreciate the fact that you all came and you shared, and in the process we learned. And I would just like to make this final comment that that when we talk about community awareness and knowing what each of you do. We have that same issue here. Almost daily, people say, well, what do you do, in your role on this commission? So I think it's something that we all share, and I think it is a task that we all must work to overcome. And the best way to do that is through community engagement. I'm just sitting here looking at you, Shelley, and realizing how much that drama series that you did made the community more aware of some of the issues that we face. So thank you again, and appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your attendance. We look forward to working in partnership. So for the next item of business is the co-chair report. Is there anything you would like to say?
Oh.
And then
I think as co-chair, I only want to make one comment, and that is that we have now had 3 meetings with the federal monitors out of D.C. And I think we are planning to do this once a month. We may end up doing one other one as we move closer to the October report to make sure that we are feeding information from our commission that would be reflected on the progress report in October. But their concern has mainly been about how we plan to move forward in changing some of those, and I don't ever know whether it's black or red. I know when a photocopy is those black areas. What color is it in it? Huh? The red areas, where we may not have, that did not reflect the kind of progress that it was felt that we should have. But again, when you look at the fact that we have only been up and running about 8 months, I think that's good, and we have shared that all of our police committees are up and running, and we would be able to share information from each of those committees with the federal monitors so that the report could accurately reflect the work that's happening within the commission.
thank you too much. Thank you. I believe that 2 items I would add is that we did have a request for team building. As you know, everything is kind of a process, so that is still pending, as well as a request about attendance. So those items are pending, and those are the only items we have. So the next item of business is the executive director report.
All right, it's still on here. Good evening, commissioners. Good evening, the public. Thank you all for taking your time again tonight to be here. I'm going to try and give you some of your time back since we're a little bit behind here with my portion. So I'll just keep it to 2 items tonight. One is an update on hiring. The first part of that is I am happy to announce that we will have our assistant administrator in place on September 4th. And that person is a returning member of the staff, Ms. Janita Thomas, who is currently executive assistant in Joe Jones Ward 1, will be returning to her old role. She's a very well-respected member of the community. She's outstanding at service. It's all she's done with her life, is be in these positions where she's able to help community members solve their problems through her jobs. And so we're very fortunate that she wanted to come back and rejoin at this important moment and take up some of her old duties in addition to the new duties. So we look forward to reintroducing her at the September meeting to the public if people don't see her or already know her. The next item is the Assistant Director of Law, which is a joint position. So we are waiting for an update from the Law Department, followed up several times with Mr. Delonte Spencer Thomas, who is the point person, and have not received a response as of yet where they are in that process or how many applications are received. So I will continue my pursuit to move that forward as quickly as possible. So moving on to item of business here that I think a lot of the community has been waiting for, and that's the question of what are we going to do now that our committees are formed. So if you've been paying attention to committee meetings, committees have been working hard to come up with work plans. We call it a framework for what we will be doing for the next roughly 18 months. The reason that we put a plan in writing is so that the community knows what we'll be working on, the division knows what we'll be working on, the city knows, CPRB knows, everybody knows what our general plan is. The hard part about this is when the citizens empowered this commission, there was so many things that they could choose from, right? So I think there's 25 duties and powers or more, maybe within a few of that, that they could potentially get involved in, right? And then there's also, to co-chair's point, there are chapters in the consent decree which we are out of compliance with. So we have to maintain our duties to the citizens and to the charter, and at the same time also move forward as quickly as we can to get back in compliance with the consent decree and move the whole decree forward. So it's huge, right? So what this endeavored to do is take all of those things, narrow it down to something that's reasonable for 13 people, plus assistance from community members and the small staff that we have, right? And then figure out how we're going to prioritize that in the next 18 months. So that's what this document is that we passed out tonight. It is a very rough draft. The next phase of that, it's by committee. It talks about our consent decree responsibilities. It talks about the project that each committee is going to undertake. And within the next several days, there will be an announcement going out that this will be open for community comment for approximately 2 weeks. It could be extended if we don't receive enough, so that's just a general guideline. And the plan is to have this officially adopted by the commission by the end of September. So I encourage all commissioners to read through. It is what's called a living document, which means it's just a plan, right? We have to be adaptive. Community members have asked us, what if something happens, right? If something happens and we have to change the plan or refocus our priorities, this allows us to do so. But it gives us a compass and a road to follow. So congratulations to all of you for putting in this work. You are on the cusp of having a work plan that the community can see, that everyone can know what you're actually going to do with your time here. So give yourselves a moment, and to the community, this will be out hopefully by the end of the week for your comment and review. And for those of you who are here tonight, you already have a copy. Any questions?
Co-Chair Ridgeway.
Not necessarily a question, but I just want to add to your comment, and that is that this document that the executive director has referenced also will give the community the opportunity to see where you may want to work, join a work group based on that information and on those committees. So, look at it that way too. Is this some place I want to volunteer my time and give my ideas about where I want to work? I know that Kayla, she's here in the audience tonight. She pretty much told us how to do the whole thing at the meeting the other night. But I think that there, and I think that Administrator Perez mentioned this, there are some very brilliant and committed residents in the city of Cleveland. We need to hear your voices. We need to, understand that you are also committed to this process. And that document will give you a chance to see the work within each committee, and you can determine whether this is a committee you want to work with on a work group. So I just wanted to add that to your comment, Jason.
Thank you so much. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next comment. Kudos to all the committee chairs for moving that important work forward. The next item of business is the committee status reports. First, we will have the internal training committee with Alana Garrett-Ferguson or Commissioner Early.
Good evening. So we have two pending trainings that we're thinking of hosting. One is, I know Commissioner Early can explain it better than me, but it is to have one or two of the member framers of issue 24 to come in and speak and do like a training based on what were their goals and establishing and going forth. And I think it's the folks who are from Citizens for a Safer Cleveland is what he said. So he wants us to, he thinks that will be really, really helpful for us to have a training from them to come in and explain exactly what was like their visioning and how they saw the legislation being put together. And the second one came out of when we had our police policy meeting and we talked about the work group in which Commissioner Wong and I am on, the surveillance technology, that we realized that a lot of the commissioners have not been educated on the surveillance technology that the city currently has, and on some of the like different reporting and some of the metrics and different things that came out that has been coming out of like safety committee meetings for council. And so what would it mean for us to invite some of them to come in and do a training for us so that we can all as a commission be on the same page and kind of understand how these technologies have, how they, not only how they work, but how they have been deployed, and get some of that background information, because I think some of us, we can't make all meetings and we don't watch all meetings, and we all have very differing understandings. So those are two pending trainings that we've talked about, of hosting for the full commission. Commissioner Early, did I leave any out?
No.
Thank you so much. So next, we'll have the Budget and Grants Committee, given by Chair Adams.
Thank you. So, just to give everyone as quick of an update as I can provide, there's like a lot of moving parts happening right now with the budget and grants. So, just to get everyone up to speed, the applications were completed on July 31st, and some of them were not complete. So, what we decided to do is we kept an additional week where applicants had the opportunity to submit any materials that they had not submitted, like budgets or any other documentation that they would need, proof of a fiscal agent or their 501c3 status, etc. So that took us into the first week in August. After we finally closed all the applications, the next step of the process was to decide how many of the applications were actually complete. So the staff, thank you to Shelly and Sarah, they went through, I think we had 92 applications, somewhere around there. And so they literally, this huge spreadsheet on Excel where they like literally checked off every requirement that was necessary for each application. So after they went through that process, I think we ended up with around 79 or 80 that have to be reviewed by commissioners. In addition, we met that I think it was that Tuesday, the week of the 7th, and we had Chief Ethics Officer Delonte Spencer Thomas come, and we were discussed recusal. We discussed conflicts of interest, and so every commissioner on the committee did sign a conflict of interest, a disclosure form, where we identified grants that we may have had a conflict of interest with, and so we recused ourselves from those grants that there may be some issues with. So that kind of was something that I think that we weren't planning to do, but then we felt like we had it to do, and so it sort of was a step that we needed to take to ensure that there was some integrity in the process. So now that we are all got our recusal forms in place, now the next step in our process is that now we are dividing the grants. So according to my math, there are about 79, 80 grants. There are 5 commissioners, so I'm thinking we're around roughly 15, 16 grants per commissioner. Our goal is to have 2 commissioners to review each grant. So I would like to stick to that, but this is like a heavy load of work that we're doing right now. So ideally, I would love 2 commissioners, but I would like to extend an offer to the other commissioners that if you would be willing to help us to be the second person to review any amount of grants that you can, I would welcome it, because it's just a lot of work that we're doing on our end right now. So we will divide them. One of the other issues that came up that kind of we felt like we needed to do, we didn't want to slow the process down, but we keep saying that we want to do this the right way, and we know that we're not going to get everything correct, but anything that we can see, we want to fix. So there was an issue brought up at our meeting earlier this month where we realized that maybe there could be some ambiguity with the language in terms of sort of like how do we define what's measurable, how do we define what is substantial, and sort of we went back and how do we define a grassroots organization? So we went back and several of us worked together to sort of hanker down on what those definitions would be so that as different commissioners are reviewing grants in their own spaces that we're not using different definitions for the terms that are on the rubric so that we can score them. The other thing that we talked about was on the rubric itself there are I believe 7 categories. They're up to 4 points each, so that rubric can you can get up to 28 points on that rubric. And so our process will be that rubric will be 40% of the final score, and then the next step of the process is after you achieve a certain score. I think that score should be 17. I think that was suggested by Lou. 15 was too low. Once you achieve a score of at least 17, what happens next is that we set up an interview with you. So we will be setting up virtual interviews where you will get to you will be asked questions, and so will be some clarifying questions. So Commissioner Zayed and Shelley Williams worked on those questions. I just kind of reviewed them, and I will share with them some of the updates and changes that I made. So based on the math, 40%, 60%, 28 points on the rubric. That means that the interview process has to be worth 60%. So just by happenstance, there happened to be 7 questions, and then we ended up with 6 points each, 40. So that it will be exactly 60-40. So basically, where we are now is that we have a draft of what the contract will look like from the legal department, and we are essentially about to start reviewing grants. And I'm looking at the timeline, and what I'm thinking is that we should still be able to get through everything. I think by the middle of September, which still keeps us in step with to meet the deadline that we initially set out, which was November 1st. So I know that was a lot. That was as fast as I could do it. Thank you.
I understand. We're running a little short on time. So we have the Rules Committee by Chair Wan.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for hanging in there. So we have the Rules Committee has two rules for consideration. The first rules is to advance the Rule 1.7.2. It's an amendment dealing with meeting minutes to the Commission for vote. This was done in an effort to streamline our meeting minutes in order to provide salient information to the public, but also that it's not cumbersome for our note takers and meetings takers. So would anybody, are there any questions? I'd like to make a motion to vote up or down for, to advance Rule 1.7.2. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions? No?
The question is on the adoption of Rule 1.7.2 meeting minutes to the Commission for a vote. Can we have Commissioner Adams?
Aye.
Commissioner Benito?
Aye.
Commissioner Shura?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
Commissioner Early?
Aye.
Commissioner Garrett Ferguson?
Aye.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Aye.
Commissioner Reeves?
Aye.
Commissioner Ridgway?
Aye.
Commissioner Pete Van Leer?
Aye.
Commissioner Wong?
Aye.
Commissioner Zayed?
Aye.
Commissioner Rodriguez? Aye. The motion passes with unanimous consent.
Thank you so much. And I do want to thank Mr. Van Leer for leading the charge on that and helping us get streamlined and get meetings out there to the public. Thank you so much. The next rule was returned to committee. We did not make any changes to it after discussions with Mr. Churro. Whatever concerns were about 2.4 received of citizen or officer incident-based complaints were resolved. So this is a rule that has been existing for a few months in draft form. So I would like to make a motion to advance Rule 2.4, recipient of citizen or officer incident-based complaints for adoption.
I'll second.
Oh, thank you.
The question is on the adoption of Rule 2.4, receipt of citizen or officer incident-based complaints. So I'm assuming do we have any question or debate? Hence none, we can move for the vote. Commissioner Benito.
Aye.
Commissioner Schur.
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Aye.
Commissioner Early.
Aye.
Commissioner Gary Ferguson. Aye. I don't want to make sure. Hold on, let me see if I missed any. Commissioner Adams. Did I skip you?
I wanted to go last for once, but aye.
Oh, thank you for that catch. um, so I was at Commissioner Gary Ferguson, Commissioner Kennedy,
Aye.
Commissioner Reeves,
Aye.
Commissioner Ridgway,
Aye.
Commissioner P. Van Leer,
Aye.
Commissioner Wong,
Aye.
Commissioner Zayed,
Aye.
Co-Chair Rodriguez. Aye. Motion passed with unanimous consent. The next item of business is the police policy.
Thank you, Co-Chair. So the Police Policy Committee has met since our last meeting. We met last week. We discussed a framework that Director Goodrick mentioned. We're in the process of finalizing that. And I think I've covered this in previous meeting. We have the two work groups, surveillance technology, which Commissioner Wong referred to, and the second is looking at how we can look at police response to people experiencing behavioral health crises, and crisis intervention, and crisis response. We're looking at an array of other issues. If you look at the document, recruitment and retention, discipline, review process for general police orders under the consent decree, and bias-free policing. One specific action we've taken since our last full commission meeting was we sent a letter to the BIB administration, including the mayor, the safety director, Chief Drummond, and Dr. Anderson also received a copy, requesting information and dialogue around aspects of the city's new initiative, the Raising Investment in Safety for Everyone, or RISE, including the deployment of external law enforcement agencies in Cleveland and some other partnerships mentioned in that document. So we sent that letter August 8th. We received a response from Director Howard last Friday, and in the process of drafting a response to Director Howard. So that's pretty much it. I don't know if the work groups have anything else they want to mention, but I hope I've covered everything.
Thank you so much for your report. The next item of business is Police Training Committee by Chair Adams.
All right, so thank you again. I did did miss one thing on the budgets for the commission. It is likely that we will probably need a special session sometime in the first couple weeks of September to pass all the grants so that we can get them to the law department. So I forgot to say that, but that's probably going to be something that we're going to have to do. As far as the training is concerned, I'll keep this really simple. Right now, I think what's important for the commission is that we are trying to plan a community event with police training. So the idea behind it is that we will invite the police to do some of their reality-based training. They will do it in front of the community. And so right now we sent them a proposal that Shelley Williams helped draft up for us. So essentially the police will actually do their training in front of the community. It will be like an event where we will have like maybe several different trainings happening, maybe some breakout rooms. Hopefully we can do some surveying with the outreach committee. So we're currently planning the event. Where we are right now is essentially we have not been able to get the training review committee from the CDP to lock in a date yet. So once we can get a date locked in, then we'll work from there. But the goal is by the end of October that we will have an event where the police will actually do their use of force training. That's being led by the work group that is headed by Commissioners Donaldson and Chura. And so I know that you met Commissioner Donaldson. I don't know if you want to speak about your meeting with Commander Magooth on Friday.
Yes, thank you. So Commissioner Chur and I met with Commander Magooth and Lieutenant Smith, and we just talked about the event, and then we also talked about the curriculum review process. So in July, the police training committee provided feedback to some of the curriculum that was presented. And we found that we didn't really have much time to review that, but we understood that they had certain deadlines to meet. So the purpose of us talking with Commander Maguth and Lieutenant Smith was to establish a process moving forward for how the police training committee will review curriculum and how we will make our feedback known. And long story short, one of them will be attending our meeting in September. So September the 13th, either Commander Maguth or Lieutenant Smith will come and provide us with the outline of the curriculum development plan, which I have here already, but they're just going to present it to the committee and then also to the public if you want to attend and watch, just so we can determine how moving forward the training committee can provide feedback that will be reviewed in the appropriate amount of time and hopefully incorporated into the curriculum.
Thank you so much for your report. So we have one final report for the community outreach. Commissioner Zai, Chair Zai. We have the police accountability, Commissioner Wong.
Much. We have met a few times, and we are the committee is trying to really learn these processes in this very complex system of not only discipline but accountability. At our next meeting, we will plan to go through this draft framework. I just would like to read off of just the work groups and briefly explain them for people that do not have the benefit, not the entire, so I'm just going to explain. So the work groups we have for the community are first the Brady Giglio work group. In that work group, we're going to be trying to fulfill the duty given to us by Charter 155 and various other Supreme Court rulings to make sure that exculpatory evidence based on officer credibility or integrity issues is given to the defense. I know a lot of our work groups in accountability sound very technical, but we do understand that there is a community-facing element, so we include people that are passionate about these issues, not to be deterred by the relative appearance of expertise that is needed. The second one is a discipline work group, and that is to systemically look at the discipline system and to see if there's any trends and issues that can be improved upon. So that's a very broad work group with a lot of importance. We have a work group for sexual misconduct and gender-based violence, and that will be obviously to address issues involving officers and sexual misconduct and gender-based violence, if that is your passion. And the last one we have as a work group is the Workforce Accountability and Labor Management Work Group. So that's for people that want to take some other learnings from social sciences or neuroscience, or want to learn these things and see if there's other elements and other forces that we can use and learnings to identify opportunities to improve just the labor aspect of, to assume that there's not based on individual officer conduct, but there are ways systemically that we can encourage and incentivize better adoption to the GPOs and behavior outcomes. So that's the only update I have. We don't have a meeting set yet, but once we have, we'll announce the agenda. But if anyone wants to learn more about these work groups, please come to our next meeting. Thank you.
So for the final item of business is community outreach. Commissioner Zayed.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Recently we met this past Monday, August 21st. There we presented a completed outreach framework, and although we have established this framework, we will continually work to strengthen this plan. We also completed the establishment of 2 work groups. One is a CPC annual survey work group, and are you guys open to taking more people to work from the community to work with you on that? So if anyone is interested in working on the annual community survey, please reach out to us. We also have implemented or developed a framework advancement team where we'll support all of our goals listed in the framework, and that is the projects are the CBC community survey, We have a CPC outreach plan that we're working on, and also we recently added the go of the project CPD, Community Engagement and Community Confidence Assessment, and we created that project so we can become compliant with 17C on the CPC Consent Decree Compliance Chart. By our next meeting, we are eager to work with individuals from the CPD's recruitment team. So we're working on that. Our next meeting is scheduled on Labor Day, so we're not gonna have that meeting. So I'll get back to everyone with when our next meeting will be scheduled. Let me see. I'm gonna make sure I'm not missing anything. So yeah, hopefully our next meeting, we could have those officers who work with the recruitment and outreach come and just tell us about where they are with their outreach, their recruitment plan, and how we can support getting qualified officers or drawing qualified officers to apply. Are there any other things, outreach committee, that you want to add? Alrighty, that is all.
Thank you. Is there any further business at this time? Any comments? Okay. So I guess we can open it briefly, maybe for a few comments for public comment. Oh, but due to our contract with the library, we have to be out by 8:30, so we might have one or two, just so we're aware.
Thank you, Commissioners. And to the Chair. I just had a I have some quick comments I wanted to make.
Mr. Jackson, could you?
Yes, can you hear me now? Yes. All right, sorry about that. I have some quick comments I wanted to make. I brought my papers with me, but we're in such a rush I don't have time to look for them. My name is Richard Jackson. I've spent 30 years in the Cleveland Police Department. I also was a commissioner and two-time co-chair of the commission. I am also one of the writers of Issue 24. There were some things that I've seen that I really wanted to address. First of all, when you guys were first sworn in, I know that there were some protesters. I want you to know that it wasn't because of you individually for each one of you. It was about the process they were angered about, because there was in the law that there should have been an attorney. One of the commissioners should have been an attorney. That was purposed that way. The other thing I wanted to get to really is about the processes here. In order to be effective, you're going to have to learn to build capacity and not deal with singular issues. One of the singular issues I know that everybody went into an uproar about was about the executive director. And I've worked with him myself, and I can tell you, you guys have somebody who has world-class education. I mean, the guys have certificates from Harvard and MIT, as well as master's degrees from Case and so on and so forth, plus 20 years of experience on top of it, plus EMS experience, plus fire experience. The man is qualified to be the safety director. So you have everything you need. You really do. But getting further into it, what I really wanted to do, and I hope you just take this as a suggestion. I was the boss for so long, so please forgive me if I sound like I'm giving orders, because I am not. These are just suggestions. One, policy committee. I really would like for you guys to build capacity and start looking at the policies writ large. You're going to find, as you look at them, that they probably need to be rewritten. Most of them, well, not most of them, some of them need to be deconflicted. You really should check with Human Resource Department to find out in the human resources section of the GPOs, I believe it's sections 1 through blah, blah, those sections have some policies that conflict with the actual City of Cleveland human resource policies. There are other policies, a lot of them, GPOs rather, that really need to be decoupled, where they can go into more of a manual where the officers can get their training on, and then the citizens can understand the policy portion of it as well as the officers. They can be trained that way. You can switch out that training so that you can clearly see which actions are misconduct and which ones are mistake. Next group, the Accountability Committee. I would really like for you guys to start building capacity to see how many cases you can review per month. This is going to be a really, really heavy lift. So for you commissioners who are on that committee, you're going to have to realize that you may have to read 5 or 6 cases each one of you, and so that you can bring it back, because some of those cases are very large. And the reason for this is because if you, in your training for discipline, you all saw that you had about 684 cases that came to the chief's office or safety director's office last year alone. Only 20% of them came from CPRB. The rest of them came internally. The reason why this is important, because there's a section of the consent decree that requires you to look at cases of retaliation. Retaliation is not just the officers retaliating against the citizens, but officers retaliating against one another. You're going to find that inside of that 80% of cases that you're not even looking at. So you have to start getting into that, which means you have to build capacity for it. The next group are the co-chairs. I really like for you guys to start building capacity so that you can build out a process for speed. For when things happen, you can immediately get the commissioners up and running in a very quick time so that matter can be taken care of. MRAC, I really like for you guys to start working with Dr. Testa and others to start building out capacity, not just for the mental health for the citizens, but there's also a mental health component with the officers as well. Lastly, I want you all to know that there are a lot of officers out there doing a great job, but we are losing officers at a tremendous rate. And all of these things need to be done in order to start building retention and recruitment. These are the 2 things that you need in order to start rebuilding this police department. So thank you for your time.
Okay, so we have the final comment.
So I heard the 2 gentlemen speak earlier, and they gave a maze like I was in a cornfield, and I couldn't find what was left, what was right. There are 189,000 African Americans in the city of Cleveland. If you take 5%, that is 9,000. They have not even scratched the surface with cases. And there are people that will never, ever, domestic violence, there are people that will never, ever, ever tell on the police. They scared. There are people that will never, ever pick up a phone and call. And he said, ride along? How many, I want to see how many African Americans in Cleveland ride along with the police and start pointing people out. That don't happen. That don't happen. So I'm curious of the numbers, because he missed us. He said he want to connect with us. In order to connect with us, you have to come not where we are, you have to make us feel safe.
Thank you so much for your comment. We look forward to continuing this work and taking the committee's input and perspective to move forward. The time is 8:28. The meeting is now adjourned.